The Lord Jesus has sent out his disciples to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. As a result, the Catholic presence is tangible on 6 continents. For the sake of this divine mission, Holy Wisdom has guided the Church to organize itself across the globe under the care of bishops in territorial dioceses. The Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee is just one of nearly 3,000 currently in existence. This is the story of our first 50 years as a local church under the care of the Good Shepherd. Prior to 1975, Northwest Florida had seen centuries of glorious, while also tragic attempts of evangelization and colonization. The first half of the 16th century saw the first documented moments where Roman Catholics stepped foot into what is now the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. Panfilo de Narvaez's ill-fated 1528 expedition likely spent several weeks traversing Taylor, Jefferson, and Wakulla counties before evacuating into the Gulf at Apalachee Bay. In 1539, Hernando de Soto, 600 soldiers, and a few accompanying priests marched north from Tampa Bay, crossing the Suwannee River into Apalachee territory in what is now Madison, Jefferson, and Leon counties. A Christmas Mass may well have been celebrated in Tallahassee before the expedition headed farther north in spring 1540. In 1558, the Viceroy of New Spain, Luis de Velasco, appointed his trusted friend Tristan de Luna as governor of an attempt to settle the Gulf Coast of Florida and eventually move northeast to the modern Georgia coastline. On June 11, 1559, de Luna, 500 soldiers, 6 Dominican friars, 1,000 future colonists, and 240 horses boarded a dozen ships at the port of Veracruz and set off with 1 year's worth of food. After 2 months at sea, they landed in what was then called the Bay of Ochuse, now Pensacola Bay, on August 14, 1559. The next day, they celebrated Mass for the Feast of the Assumption, the first verified moment that Christ in the Eucharist was made present in this part of the world. As the colonists began constructing their future homes, a devastating hurricane arrived on September 19, 1559, sinking numerous anchored ships in the bay, along with most of the still unloaded provisions that were on board. For the next 18 months, de Luna's expedition struggled against starvation as the settlement was gradually evacuated by the summer of 1561. It would be many decades before the Catholic presence returned to the Florida Panhandle, this time in the east. In the late 16th century, Spanish Franciscans began venturing westward from St. Augustine to establish more missions among the Timucua peoples. By 1633, 2 Franciscan friars established consistent relations with the Apalachee, living among them as missionaries. In 1656, Mission San Luis de Talamali was established close to where de Soto's expedition spent the winter of 1539. Smaller but thriving missions sprouted up around San Luis. There were even short-lived attempts at missions as far west as what is now Jackson County. The last quarter of the 17th century saw several hundred native Spaniards live alongside several thousand Appalachian natives in relative harmony. As reported in the 1675 dispatches of the visiting Bishop Calderon, generations of natives were evangelized and catechized with the Catholic faith, bridging the significant cultural gaps between the two groups. As the century closed, the Spanish reestablished a presence in the Pensacola Bay area, setting up the military Presidio Santa Maria de Galve in 1698. Sadly, these burgeoning communities would soon see destruction. After decades of incursions from the British Carolinas, the final blow arrived when British Colonel James Moore led a series of military raids with over 1,000 Allied Muskogee Creek warriors, first unsuccessfully in 1702, and then in 1704 into Appalachee territory. They devastated the peaceful mission communities. Appalachee Catholics like Antonio Inija and Spanish Catholics like Father Manuel Mendoza suffered brutal martyrdoms, while many others were enslaved or became refugees, heading east to St. Augustine or west to Pensacola and French Mobile. For the next several decades, small Spanish presidios in Pensacola and St. Mark's tenuously maintained the Catholic presence in the region. After the 1763 Treaty of Paris ceded Spanish Florida to Britain, the vast majority of remaining Northwest Florida Catholics, both native and Spanish, made the decision to relocate to friendlier environs in the rest of New Spain. At the close of the Revolutionary War, Spain allied with France in operations against the British. Under the leadership of Governor Bernardo Galvez, Spain successfully laid siege to British Pensacola. As the battle closed in May 1781, Capuchin Father Cyril de Barcelona blessed an old two-story wooden warehouse, permanently establishing St. Michael the Archangel in downtown Pensacola, the oldest Catholic parish in what is now our diocese. Over the following decades, Northwest Florida would experience many border changes in both the ecclesial and secular realms. In 1793, Pope Pius VI created the Diocese of Louisiana and the two Floridas, and for the first time, Catholics in Northwest Florida were not under the jurisdiction of a Cuban archdiocese. Following the American acquisition of Florida in 1821, Tallahassee was selected as the new territorial capital, roughly halfway between the two larger towns of St. Augustine and Pensacola. Catholics began to trickle back into the forgotten Appalachian mission lands, leading to the 1845 founding of the parish that has now become Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church. That same year, Florida became the 27th state in the Union. The second half of the 19th century saw several other parishes established: St. John the Evangelist Pensacola and St. Patrick Apalachicola in 1851, and St. Joseph Pensacola in 1891. The first half of the 20th century saw dramatic changes as new industries, military installations, and universities drew people in from all walks of life. Many more parishes sprang up through the dogged efforts of local Catholics in cooperation with the Diocese of Mobile. The post-World War II boom saw even more parishes and missions added as a new influx of residents and communities sprouted up across all of Florida. Soon enough, the Holy See began planning to subdivide the state among 7 dioceses. In 1968, our local church began a period of transition where the 10 counties west of the Apalachicola River, so well cared for by the Diocese of Mobile for over a century, were transferred to the temporary care of the Diocese of St. Augustine. At long last, in October 1975, it was announced that the Bishop Rene H. Gracida would become the first bishop of the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. Concurrent with his installation on November 6th, the borders of this diocese were defined. Heading north from the mouth of the Perdido River, separating Florida and Alabama, running into the 31st parallel, then due east with a slight detour at Lake Seminole and Chattahoochee, then east again toward the edge of Madison County, following the path of the North Withlacoochee and Suwannee rivers, then dropping due south to the Steinhatchee River in Taylor County, then running west for more than 300 incredible miles of Florida coastline back to Pensacola Bay. These are the territorial edges of the 18 counties Pope St. Paul VI formed into the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. 6 bishops have served as the ordinary for the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee since its inception. Bishop Rene H. Gracida, a World War II B-17 bomber veteran, former Benedictine monk, and auxiliary bishop of Miami, carried the burden of getting the diocese off the ground administratively.
It was exciting, The diocese, we had our own diocese now, and we didn't know exactly what that meant because most of my memories was us being under Mobile, Birmingham.
I can't imagine what it was like, for him to come to an area, and just kind of begin by scratch. I mean, the first thing is getting to know the priest, and one of my jobs was to help him to put together a binder that had the pictures of all of the priests and their ordinations and their interest and so forth, so that each priest would have one. And so we were able to do it. I mean, he was able to pull it together, and he had great support from the priest and wonderful staff.
Bishop Gracida was also an architect, so he had many ideas with regards to the way church buildings should look, and was very concerned about all the aspects of the church buildings. But he also flew a plane because of Cessna, so we had a flying bishop. So he would fly often from Tallahassee to Pensacola, Pensacola to Tallahassee.
What a remarkable life. Tail gunner on a B-17 in World War II, almost killed by a shell fragment that missed his head by an inch. And then becoming a pilot after the war, the flying bishop flying from Pensacola to Tallahassee. And then he actually did some architectural improvements to the church too. He took down that minstrels gallery that we had above the sanctuary, which kind of made the sanctuary look kind of low. And it sort of started that process. So, and just the whole work of getting a new diocese up and running, he deserves a lot of credit for that.
After I planned his installation and was the master of ceremonies, he was flying me back to Crestview in his Cessna 182. And he said, well, I need you to come to the cathedral. He appointed me rector of the cathedral and also his master of ceremonies. Then he asked me to be his secretary, even though I couldn't type, but it wasn't that kind of secretarial work, doing his appointments, things like that.
We had flown over to Tallahassee with him, the finance director, Greg Seagraves, and I, and the bishop came out of the cabin, out of the cockpit. He comes back and he opens the door, and both Greg and I look and go like, Bishop, who's flying the plane? And he says, oh, I have it on autopilot. And of course, we're bouncing around in the air, but he had a great sense of humor.
I get a call from Father Mike Tugwell one day, and he said, Bishop Gracida would like to speak with you. And of course, I said, I told him, I said, Mike, I said, Bishop Gracida doesn't know Steve Basso. He said, he wants to talk to you. Went to his house, and he had my file. He said, so you've taken a leave to come home to date? He said, just to date in general or to date someone specific? And I said, well, to date someone specifically. And he said, and I also understand she's getting married in May. And I said, that's correct. And he said, so you really have no reason not to go back into the seminary? And I told him, I said, Bishop, I'm going to the Army. I've qualified to fly helicopters for the Army. And he said something like, they can teach guerrillas to fly helicopters. He said, you don't need to go into the Army to fly helicopters. So he picked up the phone, and he called the Josephinum where I had been, and he spoke to the rector, and he asked the rector, he said, what's the due date back for a second term? And Monsignor Malk said, like January 6th. He said, put Steve Basso's name on the list, he's coming back. And he hung up, and I'm sitting there thinking, what just happened? And he turned to me, and anyone that knows Bishop Gracida, this would be a typical his style. He turns and he says, be there, January 6th. This meeting is over. I literally went and sat in my car in front of his house for about a half hour, just praying and saying, Lord, what just transpired? But the interesting part is, I went back and never looked back.
Pope John Paul II transferred Bishop Gracida to the Diocese of Corpus Christi, Texas in 1983. The next two bishops, Keith Symons and John M. Smith, guided the diocese from 1983 to 1995. During this time, many new parishes were established as the Florida Panhandle experienced continual population growth and economic development.
So I had the privilege as secretary to Bishop Smith and also as master of ceremonies to go to many of the new churches like St. Rita's. I remember going to the old St. Rita's, which was just a little itty-bitty thing in Santa Rosa Beach, and then being there for the dedication and consecration of the new St. Rita's.
1997 saw the appointment of the diocese's fourth shepherd, a Josephite auxiliary bishop named Rene H. Ricard. His 13-year tenure saw more growth, new challenges, and significant milestones.
I guess that was my image of a bishop, particularly our local bishop, and just the way that he carried himself, I think, the way that he even dialogued with me as a young person, just kind of seeing that authority or experiencing that authority even more so than even his model. I think just the way that he carried himself, almost like a father figure for me, was influential for me to enter into the seminary under him.
He really was dedicated not only to us as priests, but also to the religious women. He wanted to make them feel included, that they were important to the church.
We couldn't believe it at first, a black bishop in Pensacola. But we also know deep in our hearts, bishops are here to serve the total community. But for us, it also gave us that burning desire to say, we can become a bishop. We can also climb within this church. This church of God is for all his people.
He had a vision, and he kept with that vision.
He was the one who had a vision regarding Tallahassee having a Catholic high school, JP2.
Were it not for Bishop John Ricard, who set up a meeting with the governor and the education commissioner and all of the bishops to talk through what would be involved in starting an educational choice program, and the Diocese of Pensacola stepped forward and started the first choice program in our state.
Bishop Ricard is also responsible for building the new pastoral center.
I owe that man so much in my life. He confirmed me as a ninth grader at Good Shepherd. And then years later, he ordained me a priest. I was very blessed to be his last class of ordinations as our bishop here in the diocese. And so I kind of got to see everything in between with just his leadership and his vision and the decisions that he made that impacted, putting Monsignor Crawford in as vocations director and the support that he had for campus ministries and for youth ministry as well.
Bishop Ricard was fantastic. He was a little bit like Father Ricard in the sense that it was really important to him to remember your name and to make you feel very welcome wherever he was. And what was amazing about him was that he was in charge of Catholic Charities International from here in Tallahassee. And so it was a real blessing for us to have him, visiting, coming over from Pensacola.
After suffering a stroke in 2009, Bishop Ricard was granted retirement. Archbishop Thomas G. Winsky graciously served as apostolic administrator from 2010 to 2012, while still governing the Archdiocese of Miami. He had the great privilege of overseeing the raising of St. Michael's Parish to the status of a minor basilica in early 2012. Father Gregory Parks was named 5th bishop of the diocese in that same year. Bishop Parks continued the work of his predecessors, recommitting the local church to an evangelization mindset through the Church Fully Alive visioning process.
I loved visiting the smaller parishes of the diocese up there. These parishes that maybe only have a couple hundred parishioners, and they would typically maybe have one mass the Sunday that I was going, so everybody would come. And then afterward, they'd have usually a potluck over in the parish hall or parish center. People would bring the food. And literally, you could meet every single person, greet every single person who was there.
He took a chance on me and installed me as the pastor of St. Dominic. I think I was the youngest pastor at the time. But just knowing that support and belief that he had in me, and feeling confident that he had my back and was encouraging of me and the things that I was doing and where we were headed as a parish was a huge grace.
After 4.5 years, Pope Francis transferred Bishop Parks to the Diocese of St. Petersburg. In June 2017, the diocese received the news that a priest of the Congregation of Holy Cross, Father William Albert Wack, would serve as our 6th bishop.
You know, there's a common saying that says that we stand on the shoulder of giants, and I feel that way in regards to the bishops, the previous 5 bishops of Pensacola-Tallahassee. I mean, we're reaping the benefits, or we're part of that success, part of the success of our predecessors. And so I feel the same way as the 6th bishop. And personally, just as a bishop, I'm grateful to all my brother bishops who were here before me, who kind of laid that foundation and made it possible for us to do great things today and really continue this growth.
He's a gifted person. That's the only thing I can say. Gifted in terms of his faith, his own faith, and then just gifted in terms of how he can relate to people and how smart he is.
If it wasn't for Bishop Wack, I mean, Trinity House and Trinity Village would not have ever come about. I mean, it was through his support. He was able to see the vision as well, and he gave me a lot of support. And he said, look into it, both for Trinity House, which is our transitional ministry, and for the tiny house community that we call Trinity Village. And so I am so grateful for his support and mentorship and encouragement and everything else.
As the body of Christ maintains its visibility to the world through its stable institutions, the Spirit continually moves us to active ministry. Throughout our 50-year history, clergy, religious, and laity have creatively served together as co-workers in this vineyard to bring the corporal and spiritual works of mercy to our neighbors.
CCW is sort of a subset of the family that we consider our parishes to be. If you consider your parish to be part of your family, which I know I do and many people do, then CCW is your sisterhood within the family. And in many cases, our CCW sisters become some of our closest friends. And I think that's because we stay very engaged in our mission. The Burst Club has been in operation since 1953, when some ladies in Pensacola from Sacred Heart Parish, now the Cathedral, got together, and they used to go door to door collecting $1 per month from Catholic families for a club with no meetings. When our diocese became its own diocese, the first bishop, Bishop Gracida, asked Catherine if she would continue to manage the Burst Club under the auspices of the DCCW. So the Burst Club has continued under CCW. Each parish has a Burst Club director, and we operate the Burst Club and coordinate its efforts. We've continued to do that now for 73 years.
The Knights have been very supportive of the pro-life movement and belief that every life should be protected. The ultrasound initiative is one that has been started by the Knights nationally, and basically council raises half the funds necessary to support the purchase and training for an ultrasound machine to be placed in a particular pregnancy center or health center. In our case, we were fortunate enough to where the council here in Niceville was able to raise the funds, and we actually dedicated the 5,000th ultrasound machine that the Knights have helped put in pregnancy centers throughout the country. And I think that's kind of the way the Knights operate. You know, we reach out and help people when we can, whether it's building Habitat for Humanity homes or contributing to doing repair work at a local nursing home that doesn't have the funds in order to get it done, or doing repairs around the church here that need to be done. And those types of things, reaching out and helping those in need, I think is one of the most effective way of being a missionary.
We're very happy and proud to live out Matthew 25. When I was in prison, you visited me. We do have over 42 prisons here. That's a really high number. So, we have a great team. Clergy do make the effort to go and visit and celebrate masses. Sometimes they're able to do that once a month. But we have a great team of lay people and deacons who really lead in this ministry. Sometimes you visit a prison and you might think you're encountering a community of brothers and sisters because they have read the Bible many times and they have deep questions. So everyone that I know that has opened their heart to this ministry can share the testimonies about how they have been impacted.
My direct involvement with the military began in 2014. I'm presently an auxiliary chaplain for the 6th Ranger Training Battalion. The needs for the military and how the church can meet that is to help them find Christ, to help them process any challenges that they have. And again, the need to keep the family together is very important. So our school here at St. John's is a Purple Star school. It means we meet the criteria of being recognized as a school that helps military families. And we have some children of Blue Angels that are here and people that are at NAS or Corey. And it's a pleasure to serve them and meet and to learn their stories and pray with them and see the challenges we have to support.
Since the start of the diocese here in Pensacola-Tallahassee area, the DCCR has been pretty active. We stood up 48 years ago as an official commission, and since then we've been putting on events throughout the year, an annual conference once a year. We do days of renewal at various churches throughout the diocese, masses to pray for healing. We do Life in the Spirit seminars and Pentecost celebrations.
Something that we see in every event that we put on is the need for people to see Jesus in others. And this is something that we really like to see, and it brings us all together, especially when we do the discussions in the tables. We can see that this is put us as a family, as a Catholic family, everywhere we go.
For me, the youth program in our diocese, it changed everything. It changed my life. It was so dynamic. It is still dynamic. It's amazing to watch my own children participate in it. But for me, having that opportunity to encounter Christ with all my friends and all these amazing adults who volunteered to accompany us, who were invitational, who were relational, that changed everything. And so having that experience personally, I felt called to that eventually as I grew up and became a youth minister.
And the first one was in Panama City, and it was really massive. It took off like you wouldn't believe. Those young people were so energized at that first conference. It was just made you happy.
I think of like the youth ministries that I was a part of, that most it was made up of lay people, some that were staff, but a lot that were volunteers. That when I started going to the campus ministry, I had other students that were not on staff. They're just students, but they're living their faith. That was kind of the first time I'd ever seen that sort of dynamism of discipleship from people my own age, which really encouraged me to start to say, okay, maybe I've got some gifts in these areas.
A memorable experience for me was in 1993 when I got to attend World Youth Day with Pope John Paul II. Our diocese took 2 buses to go see him, and it was incredible. So many priests from our diocese attended. Our bishop attended. He was with us, and it was just an opportunity to gather with all these young people in our diocese from all over, from Pensacola to Tallahassee, and to pray together, to get to know one another. You get to know people really well when you're on a bus for over 2 weeks. And I remember the Holy Father at his closing mass telling all the young people, he said, "You are the church." And that really stuck with me, and it really inspired me. And I knew at that moment that I was going to serve in the church in some capacity.
Then I was blessed when I went to college. I stayed in town, went to Florida State, And Florida State University, then and now, had such a dynamic, amazing campus ministry. So I was able to dive right in. My sister was a couple years ahead of me, and she was involved in the campus ministry. And so I was able to jump in and met people who today are my best friends. I was able to discern my vocation while I was going to school, and begin really to fall in love with Jesus, be a disciple who was making other disciples.
The grace of God has brought us this marvelous situation where we're exploding with new growth, and we have probably one of the most vibrant Catholic student parishes in the United States, even though it's a state institution that's across the street. So it's just a wonderful, refreshing place to be.
In the United States, one of the Church's signature ministries has historically been Catholic education. Our early learning, elementary, and high school classrooms have served as a privileged place where children meet Christ, the teacher.
When we first moved to Pensacola under not the best circumstances, my parents really wanted my sister to go to Catholic schools and continue her education. And it was such a beautiful thing, the opportunity that arose for her to go to Catholic high school, and the generosity of Sister Kirsten, Mrs. McClellan, to make that possible. And around that same time as they were discovering parishes, my mom drove down 65th Avenue, and the trees parted, and she saw this church, and it was a little flower Catholic church. And she saw there was a school there, and I was only 3 at the time, but she says that's where he's going to go to school. And our family's been rooted there ever since. And I think so many very important memories from my childhood involve just how deeply the faith was integrated in my education. Even things such as my first grade textbook for religion was titled God is Love, and just how foundational that was for me. Learning to read scripture, find passages in middle school, writing our own psalms and kind of having reflections along those lines, altar serving, living stations of the cross, dressing as saints. It was just an integral part of the reality of growing up, especially in elementary school, and that continued in high school.
And I was asked to come as a science teacher. So I did that, and that's what I had done in the 2 other high schools also. And then throughout that year, when I was here, my first year, there was an administrative change, and Bishop Symons asked our congregation for a principal, a candidate to be principal, and my congregation offered me. So, surprise, and I was asked to be the principal and transitioned into that in the next school year, in the 88-89 school year.
Sister Kirsten became principal when I was 3 years old, and obviously I worked for her. I was her student. My sister, the same thing. She was her student and has also worked for her for a long time. And she really brought a school that seemed to be dying at a certain point back to life, and has really made it an institution that has survived the generations. And just the character of having a religious kind of lead the school was very inspiring.
Trinity Catholic School is a great blessing for our family. You know, there is no perfect school, but everything that they tried to do, their teachers, the community, was so uplifting and just faithful, just very faithful. And we got to know Monsignor O'Sullivan there, and he would always say after communion, he'd say, "O sacrament most holy, O sacrament divine, all praise and all thanksgiving be every moment thine." And he'd say it 3 times. And so everyone would say that with him after the communion. And it was just a small school, wonderful teachers. And now our children's children are going to Trinity, and we just really appreciate that legacy.
Dating back to the Spanish colonial period, this part of the world has always been a place where cultures encounter and enrich one another. The area's natural beauty and opportunities attract individuals from a variety of backgrounds to make this place home. In our pews, we have seen the Church's principle of enculturating the gospel come to life.
I love the diversity in our diocese. I love that we have masses in Vietnamese, in Spanish, in English, and in Korean as well occasionally. I love that we have so many different cultures. I think a lot of people think, well, Northwest Florida, it's kind of all just, the same or whatever, but it really isn't. And then, I look at it, we have 4 different basic congregations, if you will, or types of congregation. We have the beach community, and which includes retirees and spring breakers. We have the military. We have rural parishes, and then we have the government and universities in Tallahassee. And so it really is diverse, not just culturally, but in many different ways, and that makes it exciting, makes it vibrant, and I love being part of this church.
Back in the '60s, there was the movement of gospel music that became a part of the liturgy and the expressions of singing and song and dance, and so that became really something that St. Joseph's and St. Anthony's community embraced to offer to the larger community. And so it's been a great experience, and we've had the Okaloosa Walton Cultural Awareness Group, and when I was assigned there each year to celebrate Black History Month, it was a wonderful, and still to this day, a wonderful group of people.
Hispanic ministry particularly is an umbrella term if you want to go out and pastorally reach those that speak Spanish, mostly from the New World, and not Spanish from Spain, but mostly from Mexico, Central America, and maybe some Puerto Rican, Cubans. And because of that great amount of territory, which, yes, has a language in common, but cultures are quite different one from another, it is a challenge sometimes to understand each other, even though we speak the same language in many ways. We do have a lot of things in common, and we have a lot of openness to the rich traditions that each one brings to the table.
I think probably the biggest challenge that I feel we lived through in my time here was my initial few years. When I became principal, we had 300 students, which is a very challenging number to run a high school with. And boy, did God step in. Because we were determined and we loved the school, and the love of the alumni, the parents, the students were pivotal. Some very visionary parents came forward and said, we got an idea for what we could do to help the school. And when I first heard it, I thought, maybe down the road a little. And it was to build a football stadium, which certainly wasn't tops on the priority list when we didn't have any extra funds and needed many, many things. So over time, I was sold on the idea. The bishop gave us his blessing, and within a year, it was in place. And that was amazing, the realization one day that it did exactly what they thought it would do, which was a perception that had to be broken if we were going to thrive. And it was the team. It was every Saturday, the football field was full of people, parents, kids, teachers, working together, sleeves rolled up. In the heat of summer, we broke ground in May. It was dedicated before the first football game at home that September.
As adopted brothers and sisters in God's redeemed family, we have endured much of the same adversity that we see in our natural families. Disagreements, poor decision-making, difficulty making ends meet, the awful ramifications of sin and betrayal. All of these have left their marks in our diocese. The wrath of hurricanes, a consequence of our blessed location here on the Gulf, is a particular struggle that has plagued us repeatedly, but also brought us together in remarkable ways.
So I was the pastor here at St. Dominic in 2018 in October when Hurricane Michael, which was a Category 5 hurricane, just wiped out our parish. This parish church that you see here was a gut to the studs. All of our other buildings were destroyed, and our whole surrounding area. So it wasn't just us. It was surrounding areas and parishes and schools that were impacted. And the next year, Pensacola was hit by a hurricane. So I know it's not unique to us as an experience, but it's something that we faced. And really it goes for any sort of adversity, because we were in the rebuild after Hurricane Michael, and we were still in a tent for all of our services. We were in a tent for a couple of years while we were rebuilding the interior of the church. But what I loved about that is immediately following Hurricane Michael is I got to see the best of my own parish, but also the diocese at large, just in action. Just people, we said this a lot, we lost everything except for the mission. And that's really what we kept saying after St. Dominic. We were celebrating masses outdoors, so we couldn't use the church. We did 2 weddings outside at our outdoor grotto. We had permission, and we all those things in order to just telling people that had lost their homes or lost their businesses. They might have been chainsawing stuff all day, and then they would come to mass that evening, and to keep reminding them like the mission continues, the mission that Jesus has entrusted to his church. And we had to see that we had no buildings, but we had a big broken parking lot, and working with Catholic Charities, our Catholic Charities in Northwest Florida here, and also other Catholic charities from around the country, volunteers from our diocese and from around the country that came. We were serving tens of thousands of people out of our parking lot. So in a sense, it's like what little we had, we gave it back to the Lord, and God used it in amazing and beautiful ways.
That was the best ministry we have ever done here as a community. I was getting ready to go to bed, and the phone rang, and it was Mayor Lane Gilcrease, and he said, we have a chance to get in a FEMA center here, but we have nowhere to put it. So would you be glad or willing to open up the Family Life Center? And I said, sure. So we did. And that was the whole staff's ministry for 4.5 months. 16,000 people came through here.
We actually had about 3 feet of water in our house, but we weren't there at the time, and I'm thankful for that. So we took everything, we piled it up on the side of the road. So everything that we had worked for is now piled up in a big pile of garbage, basically garbage on the side of the road. And initially, I was starting to feel sorry for myself, and just came to realize that sometimes you have to lose everything to realize how much you really have. And that was a big turning point for me. And actually, it was a big part of me. It was the beginning of my conversion.
Over the years, so many priests, deacons, and religious have answered the call to go on mission in the Florida Panhandle. They have shaped the contours of our local Catholic identity and laid the foundations for a vibrant culture of vocations to arise in our diocesan community.
The way I would say it, my memory begins in the Panhandle. And growing up in a Filipino-American household, faith was a big part of that. And I don't know if it was necessarily like an outward faith. I don't think we could articulate that faith, but the practice of the faith was there, namely going to Mass every weekend, being formed in the sacraments as I grew up. And I was never an altar server. I never went to Catholic school. I like to tell people I'm paying for it now. But yes, that vocation kind of growing out of my relationship to my family, to my friends and classmates growing up, helped me to be where I am. And on top of that, just the model of the pastors and priests that were in the various parishes that we attended growing up.
Obviously, Monsignor Crawford had a big role in my life because he was my pastor from 2nd grade, actually really at the end of 1st grade, all the way through the beginning of high school. But I think Bishop Holly, who was the subsequent pastor at Little Flower, really formed me in a lot of ways and was kind of gently nudging me, even if it was decades before I entered seminary, to kind of to follow and pursue that path. And it was just a very inspiring presence.
I have a great respect and affection for the priests that came from Ireland that were a big influence on me. Monsignor Luke Hunt, Father Mooney, who taught me in high school, and then I ended up serving with him years afterwards as a priest for 4 years. Father Monsignor Mullins, who passed away. Father Gallagher.
I was born in Fort Walton Beach. I was baptized at what we call the Old St. Mary's, which is a few blocks from the current St. Mary's. At the time, it wasn't in the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. It was still a part of St. Augustine. And I was baptized by Monsignor Patrick Cunningham, who was a towering figure. He was referred to as the Apostle of Northwest Florida. He had come from County Galway in Ireland, and he was one of the many Irish priests who had this gift that they wanted to share with the world and came and made Pensacola-Tallahassee so beautiful.
Father Foley there's 2 words that come to mind: gentle and humble. You see him working in the areas of social justice. As he does his closing prayers, he remembers all of the immigrants and the difficulty of that situation. And and it presents the church's full message.
I do think vocations have been a great gift. And I don't think we, by any means, can take credit for the priestly vocations that have come forth from here. But on March 27th, we're going to celebrate our annual Mass, Alumni Mass, and there are going to be 8 alumni priests here, along with the bishop, who have come through these doors on this campus. And so I think the strength of the support they received in those pivotal adolescent years, when they were being formed and decisions were being made about their futures, were able to happen in the midst of a Catholic population, a Catholic milieu in which they were allowed to thrive in their faith and supported in it.
When I first got to the seminary in 1985, Bishop Holly was a seminarian, Father Tom Guido was a seminarian, and Father Kevin Johnson was a seminarian, and Father Hank Leach was a seminarian. So there were only 4 seminarians myself. And from the very first month I got there, I told them, we need to meet once a week to start the camaraderie, here in the seminary. You need to start the fellowship in the seminary. And so we would meet once a week. We would do night prayers, a few extra prayers, have a couple beverages, but we met every week. Other dioceses realized what we had done, and it was only years later. Now, diocesan night is an established institution at the seminary, but it was started by Pensacola-Tallahassee.
Since 1975, the total number of Catholics in our 18 counties has more than doubled. The vast majority of this number have been lay Catholics, called to sanctify their families, their work, and the wider world. Through the laity, Christ's mission in Northwest Florida is constantly unfolding in countless situations, both inside and outside our institutions and ministries.
Another element that I picked up when I got here was a charismatic element, and just the ability to pray freely and talk about their faith in a way that's just so open and joyful. And I think that has an impact on a lot of people.
Well, for me, I think I always was aware of the fact that there were not a lot of Catholics around. My parents were both from New Orleans area, and there were a lot of Catholic churches there, and we would go back twice a year. So I was very aware of the prevalence of Catholicism there, and it's how thin it was around here. So I didn't go to the parish school until 6th grade. Went to public school first, and it always struck me that it felt like we had something so beautiful, and I really feel like even at a very young age, I was aware that people needed to understand the beauty of the Catholic Church. It was something that just answered things and made sense.
One person that sticks in mind is Carlisle Symons. She taught us Latin in high school. I never realized how influential and important she was going to be in this becoming a basilica, because Carlisle did a lot of the translation of the Latin documents in working with that had to be sent to Rome.
Carlisle was one special woman. When she had different positions, and she was retired, and of course, as they often do, bring you back out of retirement, and she became the archivist in the new building. And she would come in our office often, and because she didn't really have an office, so she would come in there and try to make sense out of what some of the files were.
I know many people note that our diocese is in the Deep South and the Bible Belt, and I would say that in a surprising way, though, we have a very rich history of Catholicism, and especially being from Pensacola and the First Mass and everything. Despite being in the Deep South, just this rich history of a Catholic presence, even our mayors in Pensacola, and just with a Catholic history and so much there that you really feel like you're part of a legacy, despite kind of being in a minority kind of position among so many other Christians and their very powerful faith, which really does influence, I think, perhaps the way that our faith in this area manifests itself.
It is so good to remember and celebrate our spiritual heritage. When I think of my brother Bishop Calderon visiting the missions, I imagine how astonished he must have been that the Appalachian people had not just accepted the faith,
but zealously embraced it. 3 decades later, individuals from those mission communities would even be willing to give up their lives as martyrs. I also sometimes think about the daring exploits of the 1559 expedition, which came ashore near where I stand. They were strangers in a strange land, full of hope, but likely trembling with fear as well. Despite their tremendous setbacks, that first Mass, celebrated on August 15, 1559, has irrevocably set our course. This is our blueprint, prioritizing the gospel above all else, fiercely loving our neighbors, laying down our lives for one another. As we give thanks for all that have gone before us, we joyfully look to the years ahead, placing our hope in Jesus Christ, He who is, who was, and who is to come.